Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Why did the Minister choose not to consult with any parents before excising suburbs from the Adelaide High School's zone?
The Minister for Education.
Thank you, sir. I thank the member for that question, and it's a reasonable question. The fact is that the new government came to government in March last year. At that time, the former government had made a determination, first announced in 2013, and I think a cabinet decision seems to have followed in 2017 that was gazetted in August last year for the 2019 zone for the Adelaide High and Adelaide Botanic High School shared zone. That determination was based on whatever work the former government had done, and obviously former government's cabinet determinations are not available for new governments to investigate. So the new government came to power in March, and obviously one of our election commitments was to move Year 7 into high school rather than being in the generalist learning model in primary schools, that 20th century learning model which the Labor Party had determined was for the best interests of our students. We on this side noted that the Australian curriculum expects that the Year 7s in Australia will be taught their subjects in line with the curriculum in a specialist learning environment that is in a high school setting with the specialist subject teachers such as one finds in high school. So that was the basis of the Year 7 policy, and a series of bodies of work were then sought from the Education Department to determine in what fashion that could best be done, and that work was done throughout last year. That work included a series of reports that were worked up, including independent demographic modelling, and one of the things that was noted as part of the independent demographic modelling, and indeed the work provided by the Education Department about capacity, was that even were Year 7 not being moved into high school, then there would seriously be a major capacity stretch on our schools in Year 8 to 12, certain schools, and a good deal of that information, the relevant parts, is now in the public domain. Adelaide High, for example, has capacity for 1,450 students. As a result of the new zone, then that is currently over capacity and is anticipated under the current zoning arrangements to require a capacity of over 2,400 with the addition of Year 7s in the coming years. That would have required a significant investment which would have dwarfed any of the other investments that are available for any schools in the South Australian system. One of the key things that you've got to remember is that when we were presented with the information about the capacity challenges at the very end of last year, this was disappointing, and it was somewhat surprising. It was built on a range of reasons why public school enrolments from reception Year 1 have been significantly increased over the last 7 years, and this capacity stretch has been pushing our primary schools for some time. Since primary school enrolment has increased from an average of about 10 to 11,500 a year to the 14,000 a year that we're seeing now over the last 7 years, that cohort of students is about to hit high schools. Why the former government had not done this work beforehand is beyond me, because the simple fact is that even without Year 7 coming in, there would have been pressures on Adelaide High that would have required difficult decisions to be made. But when we were presented with this, we were faced with no choice. The choice, in fact, the only choice we had was either cancel those specialist programs which make Adelaide and Adelaide Botanic High what they are and which are such an important equity measure in the system, or else make the difficult zoning decision that has had to be made.
Order. Before I call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I call the following members to order: the member for Wright, the member for Badcoe, the member for Hurdle Vale, and the member for Waite. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is again to the Minister for Education. When did the Minister first resolve to remove the western and southwestern suburbs from the Adelaide High School's zone?
Minister for Education.
Well, to be clear, it was a cabinet process, but if it helps the member, I can advise that the first demographic modelling, I think the independent demographic modelling, was received very much towards the end of last year. I think the late November or early December, and indeed the cabinet process, the member is aware of the nature of those determinations.
The Deputy Leader and then the member for Cavell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What options were presented to the Minister, including alternative zone changes, capital build or any other strategies?
Minister for Education.
Look, I thank the Shadow Minister, and perhaps rather than identifying again that it's a cabinet process, I can just explain what, in my view, the alternatives are in line with the three options that she has suggested. So the first one is in relation to capital build. Now, it's noteworthy we have a current capacity at Adelaide High of 1450, Adelaide Botanic High is 1250. It is not possible to increase the capacity of Adelaide Botanic High due to the nature of the footprint of that land, and I think the Shadow Minister accepts that, which leaves us with Adelaide High at 1,450 students. We have invested $18 million, announced last week, to enable Adelaide High to grow from 1,450 students to 1,800 students capacity by 2022, and that is the work that we are doing. So in terms of further capital build, there are restrictions on the site based on it being adjacent to the parklands that are significant, and there is also the complexity that when you have a restricted footprint, going up is a lot more expensive than going out. So, for example, we're increasing capacity at Roma Mitchell by 500, and that is...
Order. Minister has the call.
And that is an investment that will be in the order of $15 million to increase capacity at Roma Mitchell, $18 million to increase capacity by 350 at Adelaide High. Now, were we to look at a greater investment than that, then we'd be talking about going higher and serious logistical difficulties to the point where if we were to grow it to 2,400 students, we wouldn't be talking about growing it by 350 only. We'd be talking about growing it by 950. And that is not just 3 times the cost of the 350 growth, although that would be a significant cost in and of itself. There are logistical impacts that in my view, I'm not sure we would have been able to meet at Adelaide High. That brings the Shadow Minister's question to the second point. What other options? Zoning. Zoning was the first point she made. So the zoning options. There are a series of suburbs that were added to the Adelaide High and Adelaide Botanic High School zone as of 2015, mostly Prospect, and then in 2019, a series of suburbs in the northeast, including Nailsworth, the northwest, including Bowden, Brompton, and Hindmarsh. All of those suburbs have been kept in, and the southwest, the suburbs that we're talking about. The difference, well, firstly, our starting point and the advice from the department was that this cohort of suburbs would be rezoned to schools that they were previously zoned to up until last year that had the capacity to take those students, and that none of the other zoning options available would have rezoned students to schools where there was any capacity. In the northwest, the member for Croydon no doubt would be aware that at Woodville High, that is a school that is approaching capacity and will be approaching capacity further in the years to come. In the northeast, the students were previously zoned to Roma Mitchell, which I've already identified. We are growing from 1,300 students to 1,800 students just to meet the students, the demand that is currently within their existing zone, let alone any others that would have been rezoned there. And that is a significant investment that the government is making to support the needs of students in the Roma Mitchell High School zone, which leads us to what other options there were. All of the other schools in the surrounding area are at capacity, or indeed we are investing to build their capacity to meet the needs of their current zone. The other option is cancel the specialist programs. Now, we believe those specialist programs, the languages, sport and health sciences, are an absolutely critical part of what Adelaide High and Adelaide Botanic High have to offer, and importantly, they're an important equity measure to ensure that students who have a desire for languages, whether they live in Port Adelaide or whether they live in West Beach or whether they live in the north or the south or anywhere else, are able to access those special entry programs that are important equity measures in the system. I have faith in Underdale High and Plympton International College and Springbank.
Minister for Education, time has expired. Minister, thank you. I will come to the member for Cavell. Please stop the clock. I appreciate this is a very sensitive issue. I want to remind the House of a few things. If a visitor or stranger other than a member disturbs in any way the operation of the chamber, as Speaker, I can order the withdrawal of people in the gallery. Such disturbances could include persons standing up, interjecting, applauding, holding up signs, placards, and other like behaviour. I'm just putting it out there. I'll move to the member for Cavell. I'll come back to the Deputy Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Member for West Torrens is called to order.
Thank you,
and the
Mr.
member for
Speaker.
Lee. Member for Cavell has the call.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Can the Premier update the House on his visit to Avalon and how defence spending in South Australia will create opportunities for future generations?
Premier.
Thank you very much. I thank the member for Carville for his important question. I have just returned this morning
Deputy Leader is called to order.
From Melbourne, where Victoria is hosting the Avalon Air Show, but also the very significant Aerospace and Defence Exposition. It is the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. It's one of the largest in the world, and it basically attracts the heads of most of the global companies which are associated with aerospace and defence. It is a great opportunity for South Australia to get over to Avalon each time which it is held to demonstrate to the global marketplace the real capacity that we have here in our state. Unfortunately for me, Avalon this year coincides with the House sitting, and so I was only able to head over yesterday afternoon and come back first thing this morning. With that opportunity, though, I did meet with Defence SA team, who have pulled together a huge number of South Australian companies exhibiting there, and also meet with some of the global chief executives who were attending. In particular, I had a meeting this morning with very senior people from General Atomics. This is a company which has significant operations right around the world. They've recently won a contract with the Australian Defence Force to develop the Reaper capability, much of which will be based out at Edinburgh. This is a great opportunity, and it gave me a chance to speak about other South Australian companies who could fit into their supply chain. This is a very important program for maritime surveillance for our country, quite frankly, and there are plenty of South Australian SMEs and mid-tier firms who can fit into the program that General Atomics have developed to provide Australia with the Reaper project, the Reaper capability. I also had the opportunity last night to meet with executives from Airbus. Airbus, of course, are a massive global defence company. In addition to being a massive global defence company, an aerospace company, they have a growing interest in both the area of cyber and the area of space. And it provided me with an opportunity to talk about the great announcement in December last year when the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Scott Morrison, made it very clear that South Australia would become a global hub in terms of the space sector when he announced that Adelaide would host the Australian Space Agency. So this is a great opportunity to sit down with one of the global giants, talk to them about the opportunity that we have here in South Australia. They were particularly interested in our plans to develop Lot 14. Only 18 months ago, a major teaching hospital for us in South Australia. Now, I think the most exciting urban renewal project that exists anywhere in our country, 7 hectares right in the centre of the city. I've got to say that they've been delighted with the interaction that they've had with the university sector here in South Australia, with the arrangements that they've had and the interactions that they've had both with Defence SA and the Defence Teaming Centre in South Australia. I'm particularly interested in continuing discussions with them regarding cybersecurity. Unfortunately, this is a growing sector globally. Cyber attacks are now becoming more and more prevalent. Of course, we have growing threats, but with that threat, I think becomes an opportunity for defence and cyber companies in South Australia. This is something that we will certainly be pursuing into the future.
Welcome to Parliament today, Mr Jeff Mincham AM, who is a guest of the member for Hyson. Welcome to Parliament, sir. The Deputy Leader.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Education. Did the Minister ask for a financial impact assessment on householders in those suburbs prior to excising them from the Adelaide High School's zone?
Minister for Education.
No, and the reason is that the responsibility of... Sorry, I didn't
Member
ask
for
for
West
a financial
Torrens
impact statement when the
warned.
Zone in the sanctuary area, in the member for Playford's area, was rezoned either, which he was grateful for. The fact is that the responsibility of the Minister for Education, and one that I take very seriously, and of the government, is to ensure that every child in every classroom, in every school, is supported to fulfil their potential. And
Order. Order. Members on my left and right. The Minister for Education has the call. Member for Morpeth is called to order.
Every
Been doing it all day.
child who lives in any suburb that is in the Underdale High School zone, or the Plympton School zone, or the Springbank School zone, or any other school zone in South Australia is of concern to us. We want to ensure that our public education system is delivering on their needs, ensuring that they have the opportunity, indeed, if they are zoned in an area, to be able to attend a school. Because it's not actually an answer for the Labor Party to say, just don't change the zone, if that means that that zone is going to give entitlement to hundreds more children to be in a school, then the school is capable of delivering the curriculum effectively in. We need to ensure that our schools have the infrastructure to support the students who are attending those schools.
Order.
And that would not have been capable under the settings left to us by those opposite without further capital build already. Now, yes, we do actually admit that there is an impact of the Year 7s coming in addition to the growing capacity pressure. And there is a reason why we are moving Year 7 into high school. It is to ensure that we can best meet the needs of every child in every school in South Australia, to ensure that the Australian curriculum is delivered in the way which it is written. South Australia's public students this year become the only cohort of students in the nation that have Year 7 still in that generalist primary learning environment, the 20th century schooling model that those opposite remain the last people in Australia to still be supporting.
Member for Badcoe.
The key thing is that with those opposite, if the purpose of the questions is to say that Year 7 should not have been moved into high school, then that is a simplistic approach, because it does not take into account that we need to be giving every child the support they need. The other point I make is that the families who have been discomforted because they had certain expectations about the school they're giving, they have the guarantee that we will give them a spot in the government school where we will be focused on ensuring that that school is the best it can be, that's delivering an excellent education to their children, as our commitment is to the students who are already attending those schools. And the member for Badcoe should know this. She sponsors a Jane Stinson Award at the Plympton International College, so she should be supporting her schools. And so...
Order, members on my right. The Minister has the call.
I just make the point that it is a critical message that we all give all of our families, that the support they will get in whichever of our public schools they are attending will be outstanding support. And I encourage those opposite to talk about the outstanding work that's being done in those schools. The other thing that the Education Department...
Order. The member for Badcoe is still interjecting.
A two-tier system is not acceptable. It is critical that we ensure that every one of those schools is a school that is desirable, a school that our members of parliament can be proud encouraging their constituents to attend. And where there is work to do, we will do that work. In these schools, we are putting extra money in. There are substantial extra resources going into them. Further, every person, every child in South Australia is not only given the opportunity to attend their local zone school, they also have the opportunity to approach any of our public schools that have capacity to take them. And there are a range of excellent public schools. Many of them have specialty programs, including Adelaide High and Adelaide Botanic High, where every student in South Australia has the opportunity to apply for those schools too. I have confidence in our system, and we are doing the work that is necessary to ensure that confidence can be continued in all of our schools in the years ahead.
Before I call the Deputy Leader, the following members I have to deal with. The member for Ramsay is called to order, as is the Premier, the member for Morpeth, the member for Colton, the member for Hammond is called to order and warned. The member for Playford is called to order, as is the Minister for Transport, the Minister for Environment and Water, the Minister for Police, the Minister for Child Protection, and I warn for a first time the members for Badcoe and Mawson. The Deputy Leader.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Education. Will the Minister now apologise for the impact on families in the suburbs cut out of the Adelaide High School's zone?
Minister for Education.
Look, I thank the member for the question. The fact is that I am very sorry that there has been disruption in a number of families' lives, and their expectation that they had been built up that the next year they would be attending a certain school. And that is why the Education Department is ensuring that officers are available to give case management support to all of those families to ensure that they are aware of their options and opportunities across our government system. The other point I make to all of those families is that we take very seriously our responsibility to ensure that whichever school their child is at, that child will be supported to reach their potential. Whether their potential is that they want to go to an academic pathway or a pathway towards an apprenticeship or a traineeship, or if they have a sporting preference or a languages preference, or whatever special entry program they might prefer, whether they want to attend their local zone school or one of our other outstanding local public schools that has the capacity for their student. But when I say that, it's in the full knowledge that those opposite would have been confronted with a very difficult decision had they remained in power on the 17th of March last year. They would have been in a situation where the infrastructure provided by those opposite, together with the decisions that those opposite had made in terms of expanding the school zone, would have left us in a situation where, yes, this year Adelaide High is slightly over capacity, but next year it would have been massively over capacity, and the year after that more over capacity. And the question has to be asked, would those opposite have been cancelling those special entry programs? Would those opposite have been cancelling the zone? Or would those opposite have been preferring to rack, pack and stack students into classrooms into which they don't fit, into corridors, setting up tents on the parkland? Or what other process do those opposites suggest would be appropriate? Yes, it's a challenging situation, and I appreciate it's particularly challenging for those families who had made plans for next year, and that's why we are putting in place the case management support. Now, those opposite can help in this situation to alleviate some of the challenges by reassuring those families, because they know that these are good schools that are now in the zone, and they know that the other neighbouring schools have an outstanding opportunity at any of the schools that they're able to go to, but it is not possible to fit 1,800 students or 2,400 students or even 1,600 students into a school.
Member for Badcoe has warned for a second and final time.
That is what those opposite would have had us do. We know that it is a challenging situation for those families, but it is not this government that made those promises in 2013. We had every expectation
Minister for Child Protection,
when we came to government that if such a situation were to be confronting us, those opposite, in the 16 years they had, in the 5 years since they'd been planning the zone change, might have done a little bit of the work on the demographics, the challenges, the capacity pressures facing the system. It is quite clear that they did not, because the Leader of the Opposition is called to order. That's why we built a new school. They built a new school and expanded the zone to include a range of students who would have overcome the capacity of the new school. That is the advice that we have from the Education Department. Now, if those opposite are saying that if they were in government they would have cancelled the special interest programs, or if indeed that's what they are encouraging us to now do, then let them say so, because that's the choice.
The bearded member for Waite.
Thank you very much, sir. My question is also to the Minister for Education. Can the Minister update the House on the delivery of Year 1 phonics cheques in South Australian schools?
Minister for Education.
Look, I thank the member.
Yes, I'd like to hear the answer too.
I thank the member for Waite for his question and for his absolute concern for all of our students across South Australia in ensuring that this key building block of literacy, upon which so much of a student's educational success is built, and indeed success in life, and ability to conduct transactions successfully in the modern world is built. Getting literacy right is critical. The House is aware that last year we undertook the Year 1 phonics check for the first time in our South Australian schools. There was a trial the year before, and I acknowledge the former government's role in that. Now, the Year 1 phonics check data was released, I note with the encouragement of the opposition 2 weeks ago. there were challenges identified. Now, each of our students was expected to try and identify 40 words, 20 of which were real words, 20 of which were made-up words, to see if they could decode the way that that word was constructed. It was done one-on-one with teachers. The short check is 5 to 10 minutes. 28 words out of 40 was the benchmark that was set in consultation with expert advice, and regrettably, fewer than half of our students across South Australia met the benchmark. Now, that does sound a significant challenge, but it's a wonderful opportunity because this means that more than half of our students are identified. Some of these students were identified prior to that by their teachers and their schools, and we're already working on the interventions necessary. But I have had reported when I visit schools a range of teachers saying, yeah, it was good to be able to identify, pick up that extra student who had been presenting as if they could read very well, whether it be because they were guessing words successfully or other techniques that would do okay for the Year 1 text, but would hit them later when the texts get more complicated, when reading gets more complicated. If they can't decode the words, that's where they struggle. And this is particularly important for students with dyslexia and other learning difficulties. The checks rolled out in all schools in the government system in South Australia, and I'm pleased to advise that the Catholic and independent systems have taken the licensing that we've extended to them, and most of those schools will also be rolling it out. Very pleased to say that across our education department it's been taken up with some enthusiasm. And earlier this week I had the absolute privilege of speaking to 1,500 principals, leaders and indeed literacy leaders and teachers from across our public school system at the Convention Centre at the Literacy Summit 2019. The buy-in from our leaders from our schools who are so focused on doing everything they can to ensure that our early years students are given every opportunity in life was tremendous to see. And we had great reception from some of the keynote speakers who came from interstate and indeed overseas to lend their views. I make the point that one of our local expert stakeholders, Sandy Russo, the CEO of the Spelled organisation for children with learning difficulties, described the event as, she said it was a fantastic event with such a positive vibe. She drew my attention to the comments from Professor Pamela Snow visiting South Australia this week, where she said South Australia is doing something very special and people around the country and the world will be watching us. Dr. Jennifer Buckingham, of course, said earlier this week, South Australia is showing the way in implementing evidence-based reading instruction. But I think one of the key things, the thing that made me feel even the best about this conference was a comment from a teacher who wrote, really enjoyed the keynote this morning of Literacy Summit 19, feeling confident our school is on the right path and inspired to get back and share further learnings from today, #inspired. And that's terrific. But the Education Department is supporting our schools with TRT resources to ensure that after the phonics check, those students who are struggling have the interventions able to be provided. We're providing teachers and schools with expert advice on best practice, and there's a lot of work to do, but it is so important to get this right, and our schools and our teachers are doing that work.
The Deputy Leader.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Education. Why did the Minister choose to fund a sufficient expansion for Year 7 at Brighton High School, Unley High School, Glenunga High School and Norwood Moriata High School, but not allow the suburbs to stay in the zone for Adelaide High?
Minister for Education.
Thank the member for the question, and I'm happy to answer it. The simple...
Minister, please be seated for one moment. If the member for Badcoe interjects again, she'll be leaving the chamber. She is on 2 warnings and she continues to interject. Member for Mawson, you're on 2 warnings as well. I'd like to hear the minister's answer.
In relation to all of the schools except for Unley High, the advice from the department is that to change the zones in any of those schools would not have functioned in any way. And the
Member West Orange is on 2 warnings.
That the schools surrounding those other schools were also at capacity. Furthermore, that the capacity required could be built with the investment that the state government is making, and in a couple of those situations there'll be minor adjustments to the students they are taking from outside zone. There are practices in some schools where, in addition to students from within zone and in addition to special entry programs, there's also a range of students they can take from outside zone, and they do, and some of those will have to lessen the number of outside zone students not related to their special entry programs in a minor way to reduce, potentially 10 or 15, maybe 20 in that way. And that practice has been happening for some years at some of those schools as they've been getting fuller with urban infill and trends that are identified in the release documents today. So the simple information from the Education Department was that those schools were full. Now, at Unley High School, that information applied as well, but with the additional notice that Unley High has a traditional intake from broader than the zone, and the Education Department identified that because we don't have to just build up at Unley High, to be able to enable them to continue working on their master plan, which has been potentially up to a decade in the making and long overdue, building that capacity from 1,200 to 1,700 would continue to provide extra flexibility in the system. Unley High is at 1,200 at the moment. It's pretty full, but it takes students from outside zone. It will be able to continue doing that with the investment that's been made at Unley High. And as a comparison in terms of the $12 million investment extra at Unley High to $18 million at Adelaide High for a smaller number of student capacity, we come back to what we were talking about before, which is that when you have to build vertical, it gets more expensive, more complicated, and in the numbers required at Adelaide High by the Education Department,
Member for West Torrens is on 2 warnings.
Investment that would have dwarfed all of those other investments that we've talked about. This was the advice from the Education Department, and the government has done and acted what is necessary in order to ensure that every child can be guaranteed a place in their local zoned school. The zone that was created in the shared zone would have required a build to 2,400, as said, which was not feasible according to the information provided to the government.
Deputy Leader is warned. Does she have another question? Deputy Leader, Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.